Hi, this is Dan Kelly from Liontown Miniatures. I'm going to be talking you through a tutorial on how to use Zbrush to create armour. I usually cheat quite a lot and use preformed armour blocks and sculpt all the detail on, reform and reshape. This time I'm not doing that. I'm going to show you how I do it from scratch using the base model instead. Yeah, this model was sculpted for the Patreon in August 2019, which was the month of the Magi, and it's a human female Battlemage. When I started this one off, I didn't really have a concept that I was working to. I had a rough idea that she was going to be quite elegant, a little bit ornate, but again at the same time fairly simple in terms of the shape and the structure. She was going to be wearing an overcoat, so I didn't need to worry too much about the back of the armour, but obviously it was going to be partially covered over, and obviously she's a mage, so she needs to be a little bit agile, she needs to be able to move around a little bit, so I didn't want to be too kind of restrictive in terms of what I was kind of creating for her. So yeah, you can see as it unfolds. I was pretty much winging it and just designing on the fly, but that is how I tend to work. So yeah, just follow along. I'll explain the various bits, and if you've got any questions you want answering or you want me to address in future tutorials, please pop them in the comments, and I'll pick it up from there. Thank you. Okay, so to start with, I take the base body that I've already sculpted, I've already posed and got ready to go. I mask off the area of the torso using the masking tools and do a mesh extract. That creates a separate subtool which obviously forms the basis of the armour. Hide everything else, put it in solo mode so you're only looking at the armour, and then isolate all of the internal geometry. We don't need that for what we're going to be doing with it. So isolate it all, hide it, and then click on delete hidden once it's all gone. And from there we can either do close holes, which will basically just close up all of the open ends and give us a watertight mesh, which obviously for this being 3D printed further down the line is exactly what we're after. Or what I tend to do is just dynamesh it. In this case I have closed the holes, which is why you can see obviously there's a funny little artifact on the shoulder joint. But by dynameshing it, it will actually close the holes anyway. Dynamesh, if anyone's not familiar with it, creates a fully new topology across the entire surface of the model. So you haven't got to worry about subdividing and any of that kind of business. I think I might have missed it, but I think I may have just redone the mirror and weld, which you can see at the bottom of my screen there. That basically takes one side of the model and copies it onto the other side, so it gives you a mirrored mesh. I'm obviously working with Activate Symmetry highlighted, which you can see obviously is ticked up in kind of the orangey yellow colour at the bottom, which obviously means left hand side and right hand side both get sculpted simultaneously, half the effort, why hey. And I've switched to the clay build-up brush, which is one of my kind of primary ones I use, and I've used that to gouge out the neck hole. I'm not too fussed about anything other than kind of creating a little bit of a pit so I can get sharp edges around the neck. Then obviously getting into bridging the gap between the breasts. I didn't want this to be boob plate as it's referred to, so I've basically just scrubbed in the gap between the breasts using the clay build-up tool. I've then used the H polish, which is another one of my kind of ones I use very regularly, to go in and apply a bit of smoothings. Now that's very good for hard surfaces. I do use it as a kind of a smoothing tool generally, but in this case put a little bit of pressure on, go across the line where you want a nice sharp edge, and it kind of does what it does. If you hold the Alt button and invert the tool, what you can do is create a sharp edge, but by raising the geometry instead of like pushing into it. Alternating between the two kind of stops it getting too flat or too eaten away, and it's worthwhile doing. It also means you can sharpen up the edge a little bit more just by alternating on either side of it, and you get a nice crisp edge. I've used there the trim curve tool and sliced off a chunk of the mesh of the Armour, basically deciding I didn't really want it. Again, like I said, I'm concepting this as I go. I haven't really got an idea of what I was after. So I've decided here I'm going to go for an Armour that conforms to the shape of the rib cage. So the bit where the abdomen would be, I've removed. It will give the Armour a little bit of, the body a bit of movement whilst wearing it. I'm switching between clay build-up. Trim Dynamic is another good brush for shaving bits off models and keeping them fairly flat. Usually I would use Trim Dynamic to take out chunks of the model, get it to roughly where I want it to be, and then I'll switch to H Polish and just polish up the edges. Anything that's happening in the middle of this area I'm not really fussed about, because it's going to be completely hidden in the final model. The only bits I'm concerned with are the profile of the edge and the sharpness of it. So get the shape with the combination of clay build-up and with Trim Dynamic, and then go back in with H Polish and just go in very lightly and just put light strokes across it, buff it out gently, and eventually you end up with what you want. Obviously, you know, if you end up kind of going too heavy-handed, you'll end up using the undo button an awful lot. It's better to just do it in smaller increments. One of the other things you'll notice here, I'm really not paying any attention to geometry. If you watch a lot of tutorials for Zbrush modelling or CG modelling, you'll find a lot of talk about, you know, clean geometry and all this. We're not animating this model, it's going to be 3D printed. I literally couldn't care less about the geometry. All I want to see is good shapes, good form, and a nice smooth surface at the end. So don't be too fussed, don't worry about geometry. Dynamesh regularly, Dynamesh often. You can change the resolution of it and do a lot more, obviously, but it's a very useful tool for this particular purpose. If you are going to use it for CG animation, you will want to kind of topologize afterwards, but let's not get into that for this purpose. So here I've decided that I wanted a little bit more detail, a little, what do you call it, a gorget, a collar around the neck. So what I've done is I've gone onto the torso in the same way as I masked the torso in the first instance. I've masked the area I want to extract. When I'm doing the masking like this and I'm doing details, normally you'll see my focal shift. If you look at the top right hand corner of the menu bar, there's a thing called focal shift on there. Whilst it's on 0, there's a little bit of a softness to the edge. If you switch that all the way down to like -100, then you get a razor sharp edge, and it's obviously nice and clean and easy to manage. So mask it out, do the extract. You'll see me messing with it a little bit now, trying to kind of add a bit of thickness. What I don't want here now is a gap between the bottom of that mesh and the based surface level of the torso. If there's a gap in there, when you 3D print the model, there will be a little hole in the middle of the model, even if you do a solid model, and that obviously isn't what we want. So I've spent a bit of time doing some stuff. I think I end up kind of undoing a lot of the work and just going backwards and forwards, just trying to figure out the best way of doing this. If I remember correctly, I think I used the inflate tool on the bottom side and just kind of add a bit of volume to it, and then just forget about it thereafter, because what will happen then is that will just be lost inside the torso when it all gets merged together later. So it's literally, this messing about now is just a kind of bit of precaution to avoid that little, you know, air bubble, if you like, in the middle of the model. You see I'm getting some funny artifacts, and there's a little bit of trial and error on this, hiding bits of the mesh, and I think, here you go, I've just picked the inflate tool, and you'll see it starting looking a little bit chunky and weird. And then a quick Dynamesh just to smooth it all out again. When I Dynamesh, you'll see there's a polish button activated. I use that a lot as a style choice. My styling is quite heavily influenced by like Japanese anime, manga, a lot of Final Fantasy type things. I do want the models to be stylized. I don't want them to look like photorealistic human beings. That literally doesn't work as a miniature in 28mm scale, 32mm scale. You want that little bit of stylization to kind of exaggerate features and give people a nice bit to paint, to be fair. If it's too realistic, then the details won't necessarily show up, so there's a lot of exaggeration you have to do. And I always aim for a kind of a 70-30 ratio of kind of plain areas where you can kind of rest your eye as a painter, do a little bit of blending, a little bit of nice kind of, you know, paintwork, and then about 30% of kind of like concentrated detail areas. It makes the models not look too busy, gives them a nice pleasing aesthetic, and also, like I say, coming from a background as a painter, from like when I was a very, you know, young lad getting first into the hobby, I do enjoy painting the models, and I always sculpt things that I would like to paint. So there's method to my madness. So here you'll see I'm using the move brush to drag bits out, mask brush to kind of isolate areas, the clay build up tool with the invert function on, so hold Alt while you're doing it and it carves in rather than build up, just to give this whole thing a bit of form, pick the shape I want the collar to be. It's isolated at the moment, so I'll click it in solo mode so I can work on the whole area. You turn solo mode off, and it allows you to what do you call it, kind of preview it in the whole context of the rest of the model. This line you see here now, I've decided I wanted it to have a kind of a peak and a point with a sharp edge down the middle of it. So I've used the Orb Cracks brush, which I've put the link to earlier on if you want to go and pick that one up. If you don't want to buy the Orb Cracks brush, the damn standard brush with an invert on it will do the job just as well. Even a standard brush will do it, to be fair. You literally just want to draw a straight line down the middle, and then use the H polish brush with the invert on either side of it to kind of bring up the level of the kind of the main part. You'll see it happening now. It builds it up, and then go back over it with the H polish normally, and basically just alternate between H polish normal, H polish inverted, until you get this nice sharp edge. The reason it's so sharp and so straight is because I've got symmetry activated, so all of the geometry is kind of being pushed and worked towards the centre line, where the raised bit was drawn. So yes, I've now got a nice sharp crease down the middle of that plate, and I'm quite happy with the look of that bit now. Turn it round, check it from all the different angles. I think I'll raise up the collar a little bit to bring the back up, but generally the primary form of that is good. I'll say that, and then there's still more tweaks to go. So I'm going to drop that in. Eventually that is going to get merged back in with the main breastplate. It will create a single mesh, which obviously will be able to sculpt on top of again. There's more detailing to come, so this is just the basic form of the armour to start with. You can see I've already before I did the armour, I've already created the coat, so I know the rough well, the base of the coat anyway. I know what the rough form of that is going to look like, and I can reposition the coat to sit on top of the armour. Primarily this is just to make sure that the armour is not too thick and it's not going to lead to the figure being hugely bulky. I didn't want it to be hugely bulky, she just needs to look fairly she's got a bit of armour to protect herself, but she's still got enough agility, enough of a a light look about her that she can move around and still be noticed as a caster rather than a combatant. So yeah, more faffing with the collar. Again, the bit inside the neck, I really don't care what that looks like, it's all gnarly, but I'm not going to waste a lot of time polishing it and buffing it and making it pretty to look at, because it's going to be hidden underneath the actual neck of the model, or inside the neck of the model. Before I send anything to STL file for 3D printing, I will literally dynamesh the entire model together, so the whole thing is a single shell. If I'm going to be producing a model for casting, I'll be splitting the model up, thinking about how the moulds are going to be made. Sometimes 3D printing can be a bit of a pain and supports get in the way, or they end up on detailed surfaces I don't really want, so sometimes I'll split the model down because of 3D printing as well. In this instance, we're not going to worry about that. You're not going to see that because it happens right at the very end. I just thought I'd mention it whilst nothing else is really going on. This is just me checking the model out and making sure I'm happy with the overall look and style of everything I've done so far. Little shapes, but when you use this tool, you can drag it out onto the surface. You can make it conform to the brush size. So the little red circle you can see is basically the size that these things are going to be. I believe it's Control you hold as you drag the brush out, and it won't go any bigger. If you can do it freehand as well, and you can just do it by eye, and you just drag it out until it's about the right size. But if you use Control, it locks it to the maximum size, or the exact size of the brush setting, which means that you can repeatedly draw the same size circle out over and over and over again. With symmetry activated, I've drawn 4 circles and ended up with 8, or spheres rather, and they give us a little line of rivets around the bottom of the armour for a little bit of detail. So nothing major, nothing extravagant, but I did want to put a little bit of something in there to make it look a bit less sci-fi. Because at this point this armour plate could quite easily be on some kind of sci-fi marine, or space agent of some kind. Made me think back to Mass Effect. So yeah, what you can see now, the colours is what we call polygroups. It's possible to isolate each individual polygroup and remove it from the mesh. What I've actually done here is take all of the spheres, the rivets, and remove them from the things. So they're now their own subtool, which means any sculpting, any polishing, any future work I do on this torso, on the actual breastplate itself, is not going to touch any of those rivets. So it just preserves them. I've dynameshed or merged together rather, the collar and the breastplate. Dynameshed it all into a single mesh. It's got new fresh geometry, there's no internal rubbish in there or anything else. And I've now got the Orbs crack brush on now, which I will encourage you to go and pick up. It's not very expensive and it's wonderful. And I'm just using that just to define the edges, just to carve in a little bit. It's a little bit wobbly, but I'm not that fussed. By the time this is printed out in 28-32mm scale, you really aren't going to see those little wobbles. And you do want it to be quite a nice deep gouge as well. You don't want a little surface scuff or something that looks like very superficial. It needs to look like it's about 1 inch deep. If it's not about 1 inch deep and about 1 inch wide, you're not going to see it on a finished figure. Or if you are, it will come out on the print you'll be impressed with it, and then you'll put a bit of paint on the model, and all of your lovely work and all your detail and everything else just goes. So exaggerate, exaggerate, exaggerate. You know, if it looks right if you blew this up to human scale and everything looks perfect, you've done it wrong. The armour should look like it's about 3 inches thick, belts about 2 inches thick, surface details about 1 inch to 2 inches thick, and then you know they're going to show through on the end figure. Anything much less than that, you're going to lose, unless you're printing on 75mm scale to 100mm, in which case you can get away with a little bit more. But this is where scale comes into it. You sculpt for the scale you're intending. Yep, so I'm just doing the edge lines, a couple of armour plate divisions. You're not really going to see any of this because it's all underneath the overcoat. If you want to try and get the straight lines there and they're coming out a little bit wobbly, you want to go into the stroke menu, and you want to make sure that your what's this tool called now? Lazy brush. That your lazy brush is turned on. You can set your lazy radius and all that kind of stuff, and basically it just gives you a little trail. You'll see a little red line appear behind the brush as you draw it, and it just smooths your lines and straightens them out. You do get the occasional glitch where you get a 45-degree line directly across the entire model. If that happens, just undo it. It might be that your lazy brush radius needs dropping a little bit, and you just need to play with your settings just to avoid it happening again. So I've created a line down the middle at the front, which again uses the symmetry line, so you know that can go a little bit wobbly and a little bit weird. So just, you know, undo if you need to, but you know, try and keep it straight, keep it sharp. Dig out the other panel lines you want for the armour, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with the division of that and the lines and stuff. Like I say, you're not going to see half of it anyway, but you know, it's all useful. It's all good practice. If I was to do a version of it without a coat, obviously you'd want to see more of the armour anyway. But I'm not going to be doing it for this figure. So rivets are on. Panel lines are all in, so we've got a little bit of detail. I want it to look like a well-to-do mage, so she spent a little bit of money getting her armour presentable and to represent her and her family, and you know, all that kind of you know, show of wealth and etc. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the mask brush. I'm going to turn down the focal shift at some point, I believe. Make sure you've got enough geometry in there to do this, so subdivide it if you need to, if you're starting to get pixelated lines on things, or Dynamesh with a higher resolution, whichever you prefer. Draw out with the mask brush the patterns that you want to use. So here I've just gone for a kind of a swirly filigree style pattern. Draw it all out, do the little swirls. Invert your mask brush to kind of delete and remove bits, draw it back in. You know, make sure this is nice and sharp and crisp and, you know, pretty much perfect. If you really want to preserve the actual shape you've created, you can go to group masked, which I've got shortlisted there. I'll have to do some of these tutorials on a standard UI actually to make sure I know where these things are, because putting them all on your start bar and setting them up on your own interface, kind of, you know, you use them as a shortcut regularly, but then you kind of forget where they actually live. So the group masked will create a polygroup in the shape of the mask, which means that even if you clear the mask, you can always go back to it at some point and kind of, you know, individually select it by Control-Shift-Click on the polygroup with the brush tool activated, and that will reselect the area that is covered by that polygroup alone. And I'm not sure there's a limit to the number of polygroups you can have on a model either. I think everything you can do is its own polygroup. It will make your machine lag if you've got too many of them though, so just be warned. So now I've used the move brush earlier to kind of like reshape the model. Now I'm using the move tool. So this one you get this little rig type device, this little I can't remember what you call it, like a widget. It's got the arrows on it, the XYZ arrows, and I've used that to basically extrude the area that was masked. So I've inverted the mask, which is control click. You just see it there again. The area that was masked is now unmasked, and I can manipulate the unmasked area. So the masked area is completely unaffected by absolutely anything you do, but the unmasked areas you can move around, you can manipulate. So I've just extruded this up, and like I say, you want it to look like it's about 2 inches thick in reality, to give it a nice bit of depth that will transfer into the actual end product, the end 3D printed miniature. What I did do as well, which I forgot to mention before I started doing the patterns on the surface, was I did duplicate the armour. So I've got 2 armour subtools now which are identical. One of them is completely plain and untouched, and the second one has all of the detailing on it. At any point I balls up the detail or decide actually I don't really like that, I'll go to the start, I'd like to go back a little bit, I can always do it. Now you do have an undo history. If you look at the top of the sculpting window, you'll see this little black bar growing and growing and growing with a little grey bit on the end. That's your undo history. I can drag that back and cycle back to any point in the sculpt. Whenever you save the file, you save the undo history as well, and it takes a hell of a long time to save, can crash, and obviously your file size is much larger because it's not just remembering the model you've got there at the point when you save it, it's remembering every step you've done up to that point. I always turn this off as habit now, so if I'm going to do any like detail work like this, I save a duplicate of the tool before I start, and then obviously you can just go in and start from a blank canvas at any point I need to, if I decide I don't like it, or if I'm too far, or it just doesn't work with the model. It saves having to go through all the aggro of the undo history, so consider doing that if you're finding it's very slow, because Zbrush does auto save periodically as well, and it will auto save all of the undo history as well, so just do be warned about that one. So I've created a sphere, or appended a sphere rather. I've masked half of it, stretched it out in the middle and turned it into like a kind of egg shape, shrunk it down, positioned it, angled it, sat it on the crease line on the gorget, and that is now like a what do you call it, like a gem, like a gemstone to adorn the be the focal point of the breastplate. I've sculpted in, or I'll say I'm sculpting in, I'm drawing in some matching filigree design that matches the style of the rest of the breastplate to go around the outside. Again, some addition, some subtraction, just to refine the shape and get it how I like the look of it. You don't want to fill every little bit of detail on the whole breastplate, just enough to give it a bit of ornamentation. If you fill every little bit of void, like I say, you'll lose it all, it won't transfer to the end product. Again, as before, draw on your mask, sharpen it up, do what you need to do, control click to invert the mask. You'll see the grey, the dark area goes light and the light area goes dark, and then once you've inverted it, the masked area will be untouched by whatever you're doing, and the unmasked area is what will take the changes. So now invert the mask, switch to the move widget, and drag it up. The little kind of geolocator type tag there recenters the widget, so sometimes it appears like at the top or the bottom of a model based on where the geometry center is. If you want it to go to the center of a selection, you click that little arrow, the little geolocator thing, and it will zoom to the middle of whatever you're working on. It's very, very, very useful. It does rotate it around at times, so your X, Y and Z end up at funny angles. So if you click on a padlock and then click the little circular arrow, that will reset reset your widget so that X, Y and Z are in a neutral position. Just remember to lock the padlock again to lock the widget before you start trying to move anything around, otherwise you're just going to end up locked out, end up making changes to the orientation of the widget and the location of the widget and not the actual model, which obviously is what we want. So yeah, so the gemstone's in place, the filigree's in place, everything is pretty much done now. I think at this point I'm fairly happy to call this one done. Go and clear your masks, merge everything down, do a bit of re-dynameshing to get your final profile. If you use the polish again, sometimes you'll end up softening all the details and it'll all blur into one. Undo that, increase your resolution beyond what it was originally, and redo your dynamesh with the polish. It should clean up any jagged edges and keep it nice and sharp, but not lose any detail. If you're starting to lose detail, you just need to increase your resolution and you'll be fine. So yeah, this one's done now. So I'm just going to go and mess with the cloak. I'll put the full video up on YouTube later so you can actually see the entire thing being done. But for what it's worth, the armour on this one is actually complete. If you go onto my Patreon, you'll find the actual armour itself as Armour Ornate or something along those lines in the component library. If you'd like to use that on any of your models, you can download it, import it as an OBJ file, and it's there for you to drop into any figure you like. Obviously you can do what I normally do and use it as a starting point and cheat and do all your armour and detailing and everything else from there, or you can just use it as is. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions or you want anything explaining in further detail, please add it to the comments. I'll try and address them by replying to comments and obviously pick them up in subsequent tutorial videos if needed. And yeah, I hope it's been useful, I hope it's been informative, and if there's any other topics you like covering, just let me know and I will do what I can. Again, you'll find all of this, the models, on patreon.com/LTminis. I'm putting out generally between 5 and 7 miniatures a month at the moment, which you can download for the price of just $10. And then if you miss the models in any given month, the models post Patreon get uploaded to myminifactory.com. So it's myminifactory.com/users/Dan_lion_tower. So find me on there as well, and you'll find all of my back catalogue available for purchase as individual STLs and as bundles that reflect the month that they were released. So yeah, again, hope it's been useful. Just over half an hour on this one now, it's not too bad. And yeah, I'll speak to you all again shortly, hopefully. Take care all.